Coverage of the Pro Farmer Midwest Crop Tour is brought to you by DuPont Pioneer.
Welcome back to U.S. Farm Report. We're in Owatonna, Minnesota. Final night of the Pro Farmer Midwest Crop Tour. One last question for you guys. Was it as bad as what you expected to see in the Eastern Corn Belt?
You know, I would say it probably was as bad as what we expected. We knew it was bad, but it really did prove itself over there. You know, but Chip, we've talked enough about the Eastern Corn Belt right now. We were expecting some decent things out of the Western Corn Belt. What did you guys find over there in terms of corn yields?
Well, you know, when we started off in South Dakota, I was really surprised by what we saw because I'd been through areas north of Sioux Falls, and they had some rains out there that did make some pretty good yield potential up there. But when you're south of Sioux Falls, it's the worst looking corn crop I've seen in ever since we've done the corn.
The worst in South Dakota.
The worst in South Dakota, yeah. We ended up with an average yield in South Dakota of about 74 bushels per acre. That was down 47.4% from last year. I've never seen more silage cut in the state, and kernel size is pitiful, and those kind of conditions continued right down into northeast Nebraska, didn't they, Jason?
Yeah, definitely. We saw a lot of malformed ears, poor pollination, plants that weren't any taller than me. As we moved into where the irrigation had started, it was interesting. We saw some 170 bushel yields, but the local people said that it should have been 210, 215 on a normal year.
Yeah, absolutely. And the kernel size on the dryland stuff was pitiful, and it got even worse when we got into the southeast part of Nebraska. Kernel size was terrible. We were looking at some, we saw a combine down there at St. Mary. They were harvesting, the worst part of the field was a 45 bushel, and then they get to the west end of the field and there was 135 bushels. So that's a good example of the kind of the variability that we saw. The Nebraska corn yield, when we wrap things up, came in at 132 bushels per acre. That was down 14% from a year ago. The other thing that just shocked me in South Dakota and Nebraska were the pod counts. South Dakota pod counts were down 47% from a year ago. The Nebraska pod counts down 30.5%. And that was, it's really bad on the western edge of the Corn Belt.
Now, we've heard that the sweet spots up here in Minnesota, especially in southern Minnesota, what did you guys find as you trekked across there?
You know, if there's a sweet spot in Minnesota, it's not very doggone big. There is a sweet spot there, but the southwest part of the state is suffering a little bit, and the east central part of the state, we started to see yields climb up as we moved our way over here to Owatonna, and then there in the southeast part of the state, what you guys covered for us today, you found some really good yields. The one thing that surprised me as we were going through southern Minnesota was the fact that we just didn't have the pod counts again. Our pod counts in Minnesota ended up down 16.9%, and they were the most mature beans that we probably saw on the tour.
Right. I would say 15% of the soybeans were already turning, you know, nearing harvest, and I would say we're a week and a half away from the remaining acres to be turning. The other thing I noticed was how the pods would have one soybean that was good, maybe two that didn't have any size to them at all. What's that going to equate to?
Exactly. Now, we did see something that you were happy to see down in southwest Iowa.
Yeah, they were actually harvesting corn. The reason I'm happy about that is because the stalk quality is so poor leading out of Nebraska into the western part of the state of Iowa. Really, everybody needs to be getting after that. The stalks have prematurely died. The moisture is already really low, and the stalk quality is so bad that they need to harvest it or it's going to be flat on the ground.
Yeah, the thing that encouraged me in western Iowa was down in the southwest part of the state, we still had some very small kernel size. Instead of taking 90,000 kernels to make a bushel, we were probably in that 120, 125,000 kernels, and it just continued. The kernel size continued to get better as we moved further north in the state. So that made me happy to see. The Iowa corn yield, 137.27, down 16.4%. The Iowa pod count, right at 1,000 pods, that's down 18%. Minnesota, this one kind of surprised me a little bit. We were at 156 bushels per acre on corn. That's down 11% from what we measured on the tour last year. So that was a little bit surprising. Minnesota pod counts, after what I saw on my route today, this didn't surprise me a bit, down 17% at just 934. So guys, it was an active week while we were out there. We pulled a lot of samples. I don't know how many samples we pulled yet, but I'm sure that it's north of 1,100 corn samples and 1,100 soybean samples. Great job out there. and we really appreciate it. And guys, look forward to doing it with you all again next year. From the last night of the Pro Farmer Midwest Crop Tour, we're in Owatonna, Minnesota. We'll be right back with more U.S. Farm Report.